It was a quiet evening on the highway that cut through the small town. The sun had just gone down and the sky glowed orange over the trees. The road was nearly empty except for one car, a dark blue sedan moving slowly and safely along the lane. Inside sat a man named Marcus Reed. He was returning home from work at the community center, where he taught kids how to stay out of trouble, how to build confidence, and how to protect themselves without hurting others. He loved his job because it gave him peace. Marcus lived a calm life, keeping to himself, never wanting to cause problems. He was the kind of man who believed in patience and control. But that night, patience would be tested in a way he had never imagined. Officer Blake Turner was sitting in his patrol car a few miles ahead, parked behind a row of trees. He was bored, flipping through radio channels and sipping cold coffee. When he saw Marcus's car coming down the road, something inside him stirred. Not because of anything wrong, but because of his own ideas and habits. He watched the car carefully and decided to follow it. The car wasn't speeding. It wasn't swerving. Still, Blake turned on his lights. Red and blue flashes filled the dark road. Marcus looked up into his rearview mirror and sighed. He hadn't done anything wrong, but he had been stopped before for reasons that never made sense. He signaled, pulled over, and parked calmly on the side of the road. He placed both hands on the steering wheel, just as his father once told him to do in these situations. His heart was steady, but he could already feel the tension that always came with moments like this. Blake stepped out of his patrol car and walked toward Marcus's window. His steps were slow, deliberate, the kind that tried to show control. Marcus rolled down his window halfway and greeted him politely. "Good evening, officer." His voice was even and respectful. Blake didn't return the same tone. Instead, he leaned down and asked where Marcus was headed, his voice sharp and demanding. Marcus answered simply that he was heading home after work. Blake nodded slightly, his eyes studying Marcus as if searching for a reason to continue. "License and registration," Blake said. Marcus reached slowly for his wallet. He kept his movements calm, speaking softly so the officer wouldn't misunderstand. "I'm reaching for my wallet, sir. It's in my back pocket." Blake didn't respond right away. His hand rested on his belt close to where his holster sat. Marcus handed over his license and the car papers, still keeping both hands visible after. Blake glanced at the papers for only a second before asking where Marcus worked. Marcus told him about the community center and how he taught self-defense and mentoring classes for local youth. But Blake didn't seem to care about that. He walked around the car, shining his flashlight inside even though there was nothing unusual to see. A gym bag, a water bottle, and a book sitting on the passenger seat. The silence stretched. Cars passed by slowly, some drivers turning their heads to look. Marcus kept breathing steadily. He had learned to do that years ago, to never lose control no matter what. Inside his mind, he told himself, "Stay calm, be respectful, and this will end soon." But Blake didn't seem ready to end it. He asked Marcus if he had been drinking or using any substances. Marcus shook his head, saying no. His voice stayed steady, but Blake's questions began to sound more like accusations. He asked why Marcus was driving so slowly. Marcus explained that he preferred safety over speed, especially on quiet roads. Blake nodded again, but didn't seem satisfied. After a few minutes, Blake told Marcus to step out of the car. The tone in his voice carried authority, but also something else: distrust. Marcus obeyed without question. He opened the door slowly and stood beside the car, hands still visible. The cool night air brushed against his face, but he felt warm inside, not from anger, but from the pressure of holding everything in. Blake walked around him, looking him up and down as if expecting to find something wrong. "You fit the description," he said vaguely. Marcus didn't ask what description he meant. He had heard that line before. He simply replied, "I understand, officer." His calmness seemed to frustrate Blake even more. He looked inside the car again, checking under the seat and inside the glove box without asking permission. Marcus stood still, quietly watching, his face unreadable. There was nothing to find. Marcus didn't even keep snacks in the car because he liked things neat and organized. But Blake continued to act as if he might find something any moment. The minutes dragged on. Marcus thought about calling someone, maybe his friend from the community center, but decided against it. He didn't want to make things worse. At one point, Blake asked Marcus why he was out so late. Marcus looked at his watch. It was only a little past 9. He smiled politely. Just finished work, sir. His voice carried no hint of anger, only patience. Blake seemed to look for something in Marcus's tone, maybe a reason to justify his actions, but found none. The silence between them grew heavy again. The highway was empty now, the air filled only with the hum of distant crickets. Blake stood there, papers still in his hand, unsure of what to do next. He had started something he couldn't easily explain. Marcus stayed still, hoping it would be over soon. He thought about the children he had trained that day, teaching them how control was stronger than rage. Now he was living the same lesson in real life. A passing truck slowed as it drove by, its dash camera capturing the flashing lights and the 2 figures by the car. The driver glanced briefly but kept going. That short moment would later become part of a video seen by thousands. But Marcus didn't know that yet. Blake finally handed back the papers, but his words were dry. "Stay out of trouble," he said. Marcus nodded and replied, "Always do." He meant it. He walked back toward his car slowly, opened the door and sat down. His hands trembled slightly now that the moment had passed. He started the car, but before he could drive away, Blake tapped the window again. "Wait," he said. Marcus looked up surprised. Blake's expression was unreadable. "You said you teach self-defense?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, for kids and adults at the center." Blake stared for a second as if thinking about something, then nodded once and stepped back. "Drive safe." His tone was softer, but his face showed discomfort, maybe guilt, maybe confusion. Marcus drove off slowly, leaving the red and blue lights behind him. His heart still beat hard in his chest, but he was relieved it had ended without harm. The road stretched out ahead, quiet again. He rolled down the window, letting the night breeze cool his thoughts. He didn't want to dwell on what had just happened. He just wanted to reach home and forget. But as he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that the stop had meant more than just a misunderstanding. He thought about the look in Blake's eyes, the way he had searched the car, the tone in his voice. Marcus had faced unfairness before, but this felt different. It felt like a test of everything he stood for: patience, peace, and strength without violence. By the time he reached home, the stars were bright in the sky. He parked, stepped out, and took a deep breath. Inside his house, his dog greeted him at the door, wagging its tail. Marcus knelt down to pet it, finally smiling again. He whispered softly, "It's okay, buddy. We're safe." But deep down, he knew the story wasn't over yet. Something about that night, the camera flashes, the long silence, the uneasy look on the officer's face, told him the truth would come back one day. That night, as he sat by the window drinking water, he replayed every moment in his mind. He didn't know that the dash camera from the passing truck had already uploaded the clip online, where it would soon be shared again and again. For now, Marcus only knew peace in small pieces, in breathing deeply and knowing he had stayed calm, and in believing that one day, control and truth would speak louder than fear. The next morning, Marcus woke up early. Sunlight touched the curtains and birds sang outside. For a moment, life felt normal again. He made coffee, fed his dog, and looked out the window toward the quiet street. Yet his mind kept going back to what had happened the night before. Every sound, every word from that moment still echoed in his memory. He had done nothing wrong, but he had felt judged, and that feeling stayed with him like a shadow that refused to leave. He decided to go for a run to clear his thoughts. Marcus was not a man who held on to anger. He believed that peace was a kind of strength, not weakness. As he ran past the park and the small grocery store, a few people waved to him. Everyone in the area knew him. He had been helping young people for years, teaching them to defend themselves, to respect others, and to believe that calm minds could change the world more than loud tempers. He smiled back, though his thoughts were still heavy. At the police station, Officer Blake Turner sat at his desk with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He was supposed to file the reports from the night before, but he hadn't written a word. He stared at the screen, thinking about Marcus, the quiet driver who had stayed calm even when things grew tense. Something about that moment had bothered Blake more than he wanted to admit. He wasn't proud of how he had handled it, but pride was a hard thing for him to let go of. He had grown up hearing certain ideas, and over the years they had turned into habits he never questioned. That night, however, Marcus's calmness had made him question them for the first time. Still, when his fellow officers asked how his night had gone, Blake shrugged and said it was nothing. He didn't mention the long stop, the uneasy silence, or how Marcus had looked him straight in the eye without fear. He said it was a routine check. No one asked further. But deep down, Blake knew that wasn't true. By noon, the first video from the highway had started to appear online. A passing driver had posted it with a short message. This man was stopped for no reason. He stayed calm the whole time. The video showed the flashing lights, Marcus stepping out slowly, Blake searching the car, and the silence that followed. Within hours, more people began sharing it. Some commented on Marcus's patience. Others questioned the officer's behavior. The clip spread quickly through town, though Marcus didn't know it yet. At the community center, Marcus spent the afternoon teaching his usual class. The kids practiced slow movements, learning how to stay balanced and focused. He smiled as he corrected their stances, reminding them to breathe deeply and think before acting. "Control starts inside," he told them, his voice gentle. The children nodded, copying his calm rhythm. Watching them filled Marcus with quiet joy. For those few hours, he forgot about the highway, but when he finished class and walked into his office, his phone buzzed nonstop. He saw messages from friends, colleagues, and even people he didn't know. One message read, "Marcus, is this you in the video?" He opened the link and froze. There it was, his car, the flashing lights, the officer's face, and his own calm words. His heart sank. He had not wanted attention. He had only wanted peace. But now his story was spreading faster than he could control. He sat in silence for a while, staring at the screen. Then he sighed and turned the phone face down. He didn't reply to anyone. He didn't want anger to grow from this. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Maybe something good can come out of this." Across town, Blake's supervisor had also seen the video. The chief called him into the office. Blake walked in nervously, already guessing what this was about. The chief didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, "Blake, what happened here?" Blake hesitated. He wanted to defend himself, to say it was a misunderstanding, but the truth was too clear. The video didn't show a dangerous man. It showed an innocent driver treated unfairly. That evening, the town started talking. Some defended Blake, saying he must have had a reason. Others stood by Marcus, praising his calmness. News reporters began calling both the police department and the community center. Marcus avoided interviews. He didn't want fame. He wanted understanding. He wanted people to see that respect and calm could still exist even in difficult moments. Later that night, he sat at his kitchen table with his dog at his feet, scrolling through the messages. Some were kind. Strangers thanked him for showing restraint. Others shared their own stories about unfair stops and how they wished they had stayed calm like he did. Marcus read them all quietly, feeling the weight of every word. Then there was a knock on the door. When he opened it, his friend and coworker Lisa stood outside. She looked worried but smiled softly. "I saw the video," she said. "You okay?" Marcus nodded. "Yeah, I just wish it hadn't happened this way." Lisa stepped inside and sat down across from him. "Maybe it needed to," she said gently. "Maybe people need to see what patience looks like." Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at the cup in his hands. He thought about Blake. He didn't hate him. He pitied him. He saw someone trapped in his own mistakes, unable to see clearly. Marcus had met many people like that, angry not because the world had hurt them, but because they didn't understand it. Meanwhile, at the station, Blake couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the video on his own phone, hearing his own words echoing back at him. The look on Marcus's face, calm, steady, unshaken, haunted him. He didn't know what bothered him more, being seen as wrong or realizing that maybe he truly had been. For years, he had thought he was just doing his job. But now, for the first time, he saw how his attitude could change someone's life. The next day, protests began forming near the town hall. People carried signs calling for fairness and respect. Some mentioned Marcus's name, though he hadn't asked for it. He stayed home, watching from his window as people walked by with determination in their eyes. He didn't want division. He wanted unity. He whispered to himself again, "Peace first. Always peace first." When reporters finally reached out to him directly, he agreed to one short interview. Sitting outside the community center, he spoke calmly. "I don't want this to be about anger," he said. "I just want people to treat each other with respect. No one should be judged for what they look like." His words were simple but powerful. The clip of his short interview spread quickly, and people admired the way he refused to speak with bitterness. Back at the police station, the chief called another meeting. He reminded every officer that respect had to come before anything else. Blake sat quietly listening, knowing those words were meant for him more than anyone. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply nodded, understanding that change had to begin inside. That night, as rain began to fall outside, Marcus sat near the window again. The sound of raindrops hitting the glass calmed him. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but deep inside he felt that something bigger was happening. Not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been in a moment like his. He picked up his phone, opened the community page, and saw one message that stood out. It was from a young man he had trained years ago. It read, "You always said calm is power. You proved it." Marcus smiled faintly. For the first time since that night, he felt a little lighter. He whispered softly, "Maybe this was meant to be." Far away, Officer Blake looked at the same video, watching Marcus's interview. Something in his expression softened. He realized that power didn't come from control or authority. It came from humility. That quiet truth would soon lead to a turning point neither of them expected. The morning after the video spread everywhere, Marcus tried to go back to his usual routine. He walked his dog, brewed his coffee, and opened the window to let the sunlight in. But when he stepped outside, he noticed something different. Two neighbors waved at him with smiles full of encouragement. One said, "We're proud of you, Marcus." Another left a note by his mailbox that read, "Keep teaching peace." It made him smile softly, but also made him realize that the quiet life he loved was gone for now. As he drove to the community center that morning, people on the street recognized him. Some clapped when he passed by. A few came up to shake his hand. One older woman said, "You reminded my grandson to stay calm no matter what." Marcus thanked her kindly but felt shy about the attention.
He never liked the spotlight.
His goal had always been to make others feel strong, not to become the center of attention himself. When he arrived at the center, a small group of reporters was waiting outside. Cameras flashed, microphones pointed toward him, and questions flew in all directions. "Do you plan to file a complaint?" one asked. "Do you forgive the officer?" asked another. Marcus stayed still for a moment, then raised his hand politely. "I'm not here to fight anyone," he said in a gentle voice. "I'm here to help people learn control and respect." "That's all?" His calm words caught the reporters by surprise. They had expected anger, but instead found patience. Inside, his students were waiting. The kids ran up to him excitedly. "Mr. Marcus, we saw you on TV." One of them said, "You didn't even get scared." He knelt down and smiled. "Bravery isn't about not feeling fear," he told them. "It's about staying calm even when fear tries to take over." The children nodded, hanging on every word. That moment reminded him why he did this work. Not to fight the world, but to make it a little better, one person at a time. Meanwhile, at the police station, Officer Blake sat quietly in his car in the parking lot. The last few days had felt like a storm. He had been suspended from duty until further review, and his name was now being discussed everywhere, in news reports, online comments, and meetings at City Hall. He had avoided reading the stories, but curiosity got the best of him. When he finally saw the footage again, this time with sound, he heard Marcus's steady voice saying, "Officer, my wallet is in my back pocket." There was no anger in it, no aggression, only calmness. That simple moment hit him harder than anything. He turned off his phone and sat in silence, realizing how wrong his behavior had been. Blake had joined the police force years ago, believing he could make a difference. But over time, he had let stress and pride change him. He began to see every driver as a suspect, every word as a challenge. He had forgotten the basic rule: respect first, judgment second. Now he saw clearly what that loss of respect had done, not just to others, but to himself. That afternoon, the police chief called him in. Blake entered the office slowly, hat in hand. The chief's face was serious but not cruel. "You made a mistake, Blake," he said firmly. "We all make them. What matters is what you do next." Blake nodded, unable to find words. The chief continued, "You're off duty until further notice. But I hope you take this time to understand what your badge really means." Blake looked down and said quietly, "Yes, sir." Back at the community center, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. A young woman from the city newspaper had come to interview him privately. She asked him about his past, his work, and what gave him such calm under pressure. Marcus smiled faintly. "I was trained by someone who taught me that peace isn't weakness," he said. "When I was younger, I used to react quickly, but then I learned control through discipline and faith." The reporter asked softly, "Do you want justice?" Marcus looked at her and replied, "I want change. That's better than justice, because change lasts longer." She smiled, moved by his words. The interview, once published, spread even further. People began to see Marcus not only as a victim of unfairness, but as a man with deep strength and wisdom. As the days passed, Blake found himself thinking about Marcus more and more. He replayed the scene not as an officer, but as a person. He imagined what it felt like to be in Marcus's shoes, stopped for no reason, treated with suspicion, yet choosing peace instead of anger. It humbled him. For the first time in years, Blake felt regret that came from the heart, not from fear of losing his job. One evening he drove to the community center but didn't go inside. He sat in his car and watched from a distance as Marcus taught his class. Through the window he could see the children practicing movements slowly, breathing in rhythm. Blake could hear faint laughter through the glass. He stayed there quietly for a few minutes before driving away. He didn't know why he had come, maybe to understand, maybe to find a way to say sorry. Later that night, Marcus received a letter slipped under the door of the center. It had no name on it, only the words, "I am sorry. I handled that night badly. You showed me what real strength looks like." Marcus read the note carefully, folded it, and placed it on his desk. He didn't need to ask who it was from. He knew. He sat in his chair, staring at the letter for a long time. Part of him wanted to feel angry, but instead he felt something else, relief. Forgiveness was not easy, but it was powerful. He whispered softly to himself, "Maybe he's learning too." The next day, the local news ran another story. This time, it wasn't about the video, but about how the town had come together since the event. People were attending community meetings, sharing stories, and discussing how to improve understanding between citizens and police. The same event that had started as conflict was now slowly turning into connection. Marcus's calmness had become an example. Schools invited him to speak. Parents brought their kids to his classes. The mayor asked him to join a new town committee focused on unity and fairness. Though he accepted humbly, Marcus always reminded people that the real credit belonged to everyone who chose peace over anger. A week later, Blake asked the chief for permission to meet Marcus. The chief hesitated at first, but finally agreed, hoping it could help both men heal. When Blake arrived at the center, he stood by the door for a long time before walking in. Marcus looked up from the mat where he was helping a young student learn balance. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Finally, Blake said quietly, "I came to thank you." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "For what?" Blake swallowed hard. "For not losing your calm. If you had, things could have gone much worse. You taught me something I should have known long ago." Marcus studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. "We all learn when it's time," he said gently. Blake shook his hand firmly. That simple moment, unseen by cameras or reporters, carried more meaning than any public apology could. As Blake left, Marcus looked around the room filled with laughter, light, and hope. He realized that peace had won, not just for him, but for everyone watching, even for the man who once stood against him. Sometimes the strongest fight is the one fought without anger. Sometimes it's the quiet hearts that change the loudest minds. Days turned into weeks, and the town was still talking about Marcus in the video. What had started as a small roadside moment had grown into something much larger. Schools, churches, and even small cafes had conversations about respect and fairness. People said the video made them think about how they treated others. Marcus never wanted fame, but his story had become a quiet lesson that touched many hearts. At the community center, life began to find rhythm again. The children were happy to see their teacher smiling more. They didn't fully understand the attention around him, but they knew that something important had happened. Marcus focused on keeping their spirits bright. He added new lessons about patience, self-control, and peace. He told them stories about how calmness can stop storms before they begin. When they practiced their moves, he reminded them, "Your mind should always move slower than your hands. That's how you stay in control." The kids listened closely, feeling proud to learn from someone everyone respected. Outside the center, more reporters began visiting the town. Some wanted to talk about Marcus's past. Others wanted to find mistakes in the story. But Marcus always gave the same gentle answer. "This is not about me. It's about how we treat one another." His words were simple, yet they carried truth that reached beyond the headlines. Meanwhile, Officer Blake Turner was living through the hardest time of his career. His badge had been taken for review, and his future at the department was uncertain. Some of his coworkers avoided him. Others whispered when he walked by. He couldn't blame them. Every day felt heavy, filled with regret. Still, something inside him had started to change. For the first time in years, he spent his evenings thinking about what kind of person he wanted to be. He began reading books about empathy and fairness. He watched videos about community work and listened to stories from officers who believed in kindness first. Blake also began visiting the park where he once stopped people on patrol. Instead of watching for mistakes, he sat quietly, observing families walking together and children laughing. The world looked different now, not as a place full of suspects, but as a place full of lives. He wondered how many moments he might have ruined simply because he never looked closely enough. One day, while sitting on a bench, he saw a familiar figure jogging by. Marcus. For a moment, Blake thought about calling out, but he decided not to. He didn't want to disturb him. Marcus slowed near the fountain, stretching and catching his breath. He looked peaceful. Watching him, Blake realized that peace was something you had to build, not something that just happened. A few days later, the town council held a meeting to discuss changes in local police conduct. Many people attended, including Marcus. He hadn't planned to speak, but when the mayor invited him, the crowd encouraged it. Marcus stood slowly, walked to the microphone, and spoke with quiet confidence. "I believe most people want to do good," he began. "Sometimes we forget that kindness is stronger than control. I'm not here to blame anyone. I just want to help build understanding so that no one has to live through what I did." His calm voice filled the hall. The audience stayed silent, listening closely. When he finished, everyone clapped softly, not out of excitement, but out of respect. The mayor thanked him, saying his story had opened eyes in ways laws never could. Even a few officers in the back nodded quietly. Blake wasn't there that day, but when he heard about Marcus's speech later, he felt something inside him shift again. That night, Blake sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. He wrote down thoughts he had been too proud to admit before. "I judged before I understood. I acted before I listened. I forgot that respect comes before authority." He read the words again and felt tears sting his eyes. He didn't write to make excuses. He wrote to remember what not to forget again. The next morning, Blake requested a meeting with the police chief. When he entered the office, the chief looked at him carefully. "Blake, I've been hearing things. You've been quiet lately," the chief said. "Yes, sir," Blake replied softly. "I've been learning." The chief leaned forward. "What have you learned?" Blake took a breath. "That wearing a badge doesn't make me better. It makes me responsible. I lost sight of that." The chief stayed silent for a moment, then said, "Marcus's speech moved a lot of people. You should hear it yourself." Blake nodded. "I already did," he replied. "And I want to make things right." The chief studied him closely. "You can start by helping with our new community program. We're working with Marcus to teach officers how to handle difficult situations calmly. I want you there." Blake hesitated. The thought of seeing Marcus again made him nervous, but he knew it was the right thing. "Yes, sir," he said finally. "I'll be there." A week later, Marcus walked into the same hall where he usually trained children, but this time the room looked different. Chairs were lined up and a small group of police officers sat waiting. At the back sat Blake, quiet and unsure of what to expect. Marcus didn't make a speech. Instead, he began teaching the same lessons he gave to his students, lessons about balance, control, and awareness. He demonstrated simple moves that helped calm the body and clear the mind. "This isn't just about self-defense," he said. "It's about peace. When you learn to control yourself, you don't lose control of others." The officers followed his instructions, some awkwardly, some seriously. Marcus moved among them, offering gentle corrections and patient smiles. When the class ended, most officers thanked him and left. Only Blake remained behind. Marcus noticed him standing near the door. "You stayed," Marcus said softly. Blake nodded. "I wanted to thank you again," he said. "I've been trying to understand. I didn't before, but now I see it. You didn't try to embarrass me. You showed me how I could be better." Marcus gave a small nod. "We all grow when we're ready," he replied. "It takes courage to face your own mistakes." Blake looked down, then met his eyes again. "I hope one day I can earn back some respect." Marcus extended his hand. "You just started to." Their handshake was firm and real. In that moment, there was no anger between them, only understanding. In the following days, word spread about the training session. The town saw how both men had chosen to build peace instead of division. People began to see that real change could come not through loud arguments, but through quiet courage and humility. One evening, Marcus was invited to speak at a regional conference about community safety. He didn't use big words or complicated stories. He simply shared what he believed, that every person has two choices when faced with unfairness: to act with anger or with peace. Peace, he said, is harder, but it lasts longer. His words earned a standing ovation. That same night, Blake watched the speech online. He smiled quietly, feeling grateful that the man he once treated unfairly had given him a second chance. He promised himself to live differently from then on. As days passed, Marcus continued his work, still humble, still calm. The town grew a little kinder. Officers greeted citizens more warmly. Children at the community center spoke proudly about their teacher who stayed calm under pressure. The highway where it all began was quiet again, the same stretch of road where peace had been tested and reborn. Sometimes, when Marcus drove past it, he slowed down and looked at the trees glowing under the streetlights. He no longer felt anger or fear, and only gratitude, because what had started as an unfair stop had turned into a story of learning, forgiveness, and hope. It reminded him that even in the darkest moments, patience could light the way. And for Officer Blake, that light had shown him the path toward becoming the kind of man he was meant to be all along. The months that followed brought quiet change to the town. The air felt lighter. The tension that once hung between citizens and police began to fade. People started talking to one another more, smiling at each other in grocery lines, waving at patrol cars instead of avoiding them. It was slow progress, but it was real. Something about Marcus's story had reminded everyone that kindness was not weakness, and that peace, once chosen, could grow stronger than pride or anger ever could. Marcus returned fully to his work at the community center, now busier than ever. New students joined his classes each week. Teenagers, adults, even parents who wanted to learn the same calm discipline he lived by. He welcomed everyone, teaching not just how to move, but how to think before reacting. "If you can control your breath," he would say with a calm smile, "you can control your choices." His words stayed with the students long after they left. Some afternoons, he would see small groups of people outside, sitting on benches and talking about how things were changing. They mentioned how officers now greeted them politely, how traffic stops no longer felt full of fear. Marcus always listened quietly, never claiming credit. He didn't want to be seen as a hero. He wanted people to understand that they had all taken part in making things better. Officer Blake, meanwhile, had returned to duty after months of training and reflection. But he was not the same man anymore. The department had created a new program for officers, one that required each of them to spend time in community service before returning to patrol. Blake asked to be assigned to the community center, where he could assist Marcus with the youth program. At first, some people were unsure about it, but Marcus agreed immediately. He believed in giving people second chances. When Blake walked into the center for his first day of service, the children stared for a moment. They recognized him from the videos, though Marcus had never spoken poorly of him. Marcus walked over and smiled. "Welcome back," he said simply. Blake nodded, grateful. That small gesture meant everything. They worked together every week after that. Blake helped organize equipment and sometimes joined the lessons. He was clumsy at first, unfamiliar with the slow and careful movements Marcus taught, but he listened closely. The children began to warm up to him too. One of them asked shyly, "Are you the same officer from the video?" Blake paused for a second, then smiled softly. "Yes, I am. But I'm learning too, just like you." Marcus overheard that and felt a deep peace in his heart. Forgiveness had not erased the past, but it had built something stronger: understanding. The two men had become a quiet example of what change could look like. One Saturday afternoon, the town held a community fair near the park. Families brought food, children ran around with balloons, and music played through speakers. For the first time in years, the police department set up a small booth where officers played games with kids instead of standing guard. Marcus was invited as a guest speaker. When he stepped on stage, the crowd cheered softly. He didn't like big attention, but he knew this moment mattered. He spoke gently, his tone warm and calm. "A few months ago," he said, "I stood on a road where fear and misunderstanding could have destroyed lives. But because peace was chosen instead of anger, we stand here today, together. Change doesn't come from shouting. It comes from listening, from forgiving, and from learning. We are all capable of both good and bad, but when we choose patience, we build a world worth living in." The crowd clapped, not with loud excitement, but with heartfelt respect. In the front row sat Blake, wearing plain clothes instead of his uniform. He smiled faintly, proud but humble. He had learned to see Marcus not as someone who exposed his mistakes, but as someone who saved him from a path he didn't even realize he was on. After the speech, Blake walked up to Marcus. "You were right," he said quietly. "Peace does win in the end." Marcus looked at him and replied, "It only wins when we let it." They shook hands again, the same way they had done months earlier, but this time it felt different. It wasn't forgiveness anymore. It was friendship. Over time, they started a new joint program called Road to Respect. It brought together officers, students, and community members for open discussions. People shared experiences and fears, learning from one another. Blake helped organize each session, and Marcus led the talks. The room often filled with laughter, tears, and hope. It wasn't always easy. Some people came in angry or doubtful, but by the end of each session, there was always a sense of calm. One evening after a session, as the last few people left, Blake and Marcus sat on the steps outside the center. The streetlights glowed softly and the air was still. "Funny how one night can change everything," Blake said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Sometimes it takes a storm to remind us how to build peace." They sat there for a while, watching cars pass. Neither spoke much, but both felt that unspoken understanding that came when two people had walked through fire and come out better. Blake looked over and said, "You know, I think I finally understand what real strength looks like." Marcus smiled gently. "It's not in power or pride," he said. "It's in calm hearts." Months later, a news network invited Marcus and Blake to share their story on a national program. At first, Marcus hesitated. He didn't want fame. But Blake encouraged him. "Maybe it can help others the way it helped me." Marcus agreed. During the interview, they both spoke with honesty. Blake admitted his mistakes and how the experience had changed him. Marcus talked about how forgiveness was not easy, but it was necessary. Their story touched millions of viewers. Messages poured in from across the country, people thanking them for reminding the world that kindness and respect still mattered. After the interview, they returned to their small town quietly, back to their normal lives. Marcus continued teaching and Blake continued serving. But something about them had changed forever. They were no longer just teacher and officer. They were proof that peace was stronger than conflict. One evening, Marcus closed up the center late. The lights were off and the moonlight shone through the windows. He stood for a moment in the quiet, thinking about how far things had come. From a single stop on a lonely highway to a story that had reached people everywhere, it all began with one simple choice to stay calm. As he walked out, he saw Blake waiting near his car. "I was just passing by," Blake said with a small grin. "Thought I'd check if you needed help locking up." Marcus laughed softly. "You're late," he said. They both smiled and stood together for a moment under the stars. The night was peaceful, the air cool and still. Before leaving, Blake said quietly, "I used to think strength meant winning. Now I know it means understanding." Marcus nodded, his eyes warm. "That's the strongest kind there is." They said goodbye, each heading their separate way, yet connected by the lesson they had shared with the world. The road that had once divided them now symbolized something new, a bridge between fear and trust, between power and peace. And as Marcus drove home, the same stretch of highway rolled out ahead of him, silent and calm. He glanced in the rearview mirror where the reflection of his taillights shimmered faintly in the dark. He smiled, knowing that even small choices, like staying calm, forgiving, and teaching peace, could change the world in ways no one could measure. It wasn't a story of a hero or a villain anymore. It was a story of two men who learned that the greatest victory is not found in winning an argument or proving someone wrong. It's found in understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to do better. And that, more than anything, was the ending both of them had needed all along.